Well, I'm here, and it's Wednesday, and you're here too, so it must be time for another Business Analysis Live. My name is Susan Moore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at the International Institute of Business Analysis. We're happy you're joining us today. You must want to know more about today's topic. Let me tell you what it is. It is why business process models matter. Maybe you've been working on a project and you've said, let's model that process. And maybe you heard from somebody else, why do I need to do that? And maybe you didn't have an answer that they thought was good. Well, I've got two guests today who are going to talk about why business process models matter. So let's bring on stage Dan Funk and Alex Herron, and we're going to talk some more about this today. Hello. Thank you guys for
Hi.
joining us today.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, why don't, before we get started, why don't we just do some quick introductions? So, Dan, introduce yourself and maybe also tell us a little bit about what you do um, in your role.
my name is Dan Funk. I run a consulting firm that does business process automation. So we've developed a tool for actually modeling those diagrams and then running them. Um, and yeah, I'm the head of the company, but also a core contributor. And most of the work that we do is open source, meaning it's freely available. So the Spiff workflow tool that we'll talk about today is something you could go and try out right now and use.
Ah, interesting. And Alex?
And I'm Alex Herron, and I am the CEO of Dan's company, but also primarily I work as a business process architect. So I work with our clients and help create these business process models that we're going to be talking about and run them through the whole process of getting from a concept to a model. And in a past life at a Rosetta Stone, I was a business analyst. And so I'm very excited to be talking to this group of business analyst professionals, since I think there's a lot of connection between what business analysts do and what we are doing now with process architecture.
Yeah. So, business process is literally your business. Right?
Yes.
And so I think this is I think it is great to hear from you guys exactly why they matter, because that's kind of the work that you do. And so I just want to remind our viewers out there today, we are live. So if you've got questions about why why business process models should matter, you can drop that into our comments section. We're going to be taking some questions later. Um, all right. Well, so let's just start with the easy question first. Is it easy? I don't know. What is a business process? what what is it? All right. And Dan?
Sure. So I think like the first thing that comes to mind is a flow chart, right? You're in a business meeting, you pick up a pen. It is one of the first things that, one of the easiest things that you can draw out on a board and start to develop consensus around an idea. This is the process that we're going to follow. Here are the steps that we need to take. And that is the very first step of business process modeling. And it's really kind of a question, and we'll talk about this as the conversation goes on, about how far you take that and to like what level that becomes like the defining artifact of your system.
Yeah. All right. So, um, business processes. All right. Well, let's go maybe a little bit. Well, I don't know. Where do we want to go? Alex, I'm going to ask you to add on to that as a business process architect. What
Yeah, I mean, what Dan said was basically the gist of what a business process is. A more formal definition is that's a series of steps or activities performed by an organization to achieve a particular business goal or objective. And usually these business processes are designed to bring value to the organization while achieving this goal or objective. And that's a big part of it, is that you do this to bring value to the company, to the organization, and you can bring value by either bringing a new process on board, or sometimes you're redoing an existing process to help make it more efficient, again increasing the value.
I as you were talking about that, I was thinking about like the timing of the creation of these things. I often think that if we go into a situation where we're going to build something, we might think about just going off and building it rather than taking a look at the process. So why why would I want to use a business process model? So we've talked about what is a business process, but why would I want to use them? What are the benefits of using them in a project?
I think the biggest benefit is that ability to not just convey that idea, right, and to build consensus, which I think is what business analysts, professionals in general are trying to do, right? You're trying to communicate with other people, distill out ideas, make sure you understand those ideas, and then somehow get them to another team so that they get implemented correctly. But like in the long term, they can become a means of measuring how well you've done, right? So if you um, watch that process, you can iteratively refine it and say, all right, here's where our bottlenecks are. This is where our issue is. These are the teams that need help. And this is how we can restructure this to become more efficient and effective. And that saves the company money. And ultimately that's where that's what pays for our jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that. So here's kind of what I heard, which to me makes the case for why we should do more of these. So conveying the facts of how something works, or conveying the idea so that we can get consensus on actually what happens, but also a way of measuring. Maybe people don't think about that business processes can help us to measure things. Um, because that business process, even if it's just a workflow, we can add a little bit more to it, and we can suddenly measure like the flow of a process, the time between steps. So um, it can be something more than just the workflow itself. I don't know, Alex, what do you think about that? You're the business process architect here. Where do you see business, like where can you take business processes next?
Well, you're hitting right on it. Much like everybody talks about when building an application, the software development lifecycle, there's also a business process lifecycle. And in the beginning, you have the design and then the modeling, but then after that, you also have monitoring and optimization. And the monitoring is part of what we were just talking about. And Dan was mentioning that you can put in uh, monitoring steps in there so that you know how long something's taking, who is the person that's not getting back with the approvals as quickly as other people, things of that sort, so that you can edge them along a little bit. And then also later, once you've learned from that monitoring, you can jump into the optimization side of things and try to find out different ways of optimizing. Maybe put in something where some people you remind them every day instead of every other day as far as approvals and things of this sort. So there's a lot that can be done within the whole life cycle.
I like this idea. You've brought up another way for us to think about this as business processes having a life cycle. You also mentioned SDLC, so software development life cycle. They can help us there as well. I don't know, Dan, do you want to add on to that? Because I think this is a really interesting concept as well. Sometimes we think about those business processes as just a single artifact that gets developed. But what I'm hearing us talk move to now is no, actually they can have more than just a single point in time view of a process.
So that's very much what our tool does. Is it kind of takes you from sort of a level one, which is very much like a flow chart, to like sort of the next level where you're closer to the software development life cycle, and you're actually you become integrated into it, right? So you're not just drawing a diagram that somebody's going to stick in a filing cabinet and never look at again, or you're going to look at later and say, this doesn't represent what we ended up doing. If you can ground your software development and connect it directly to that diagram and say, no, really, like this diagram is a living thing that controls what the software is going to do each step of the way, then your diagram that you agreed to in that meeting becomes concrete and absolute. Each step of the way is directly connected to code that executes, or forms that people interact with. And that's what really delivers on that ability to iterate and improve your business processes, right? If you can do a little bit of that sort of automation of that workflow and have it really connected to what you do, then you can measure how good those initial ideas are, and you can iteratively improve them.
Yeah. Oh, I think sometimes I'll extend on that a little bit, because I do think sometimes business processes, the models themselves can just be some random representation of things, but it sounds like the sweet spot of those models is when you can connect it to what people really do, and build it in a way that, one, people can really be accountable to. They can say, that is my step, I do that step. And you can do that maybe through um, the measurement, but also making it executable. um, I don't know, Alex, if you want to talk about the value in making a business process model executable, and what do we mean by executable? Maybe explain that too.
Yeah, and to do that, I'm just going to do a brief history, which help have a better understanding of what we're talking about as far as executable. But the whole concept of business processes, models, and management has been around since like the early 1900s. There were an influential book on the principles of scientific management by Frederick Taylor that was written, that Henry Ford adopted to do his car assembly lines for. And in the beginning, it was mostly manufacturing and things of this sort. And then in the 50s, when computers started becoming more relevant, we started seeing the improvements in business process and using business process modeling, mostly flowcharts. And these computers got injected into the business world as well. But then the key for us was in the 2000s, when a nonprofit group called the Business Process Management Institute was formed. And it was a group of fairly large companies came together, and they realized that there was a lot of non-standard ways of doing business process management and modeling and things of this sort. And they wanted to try to standardize that. So they worked real hard, and what they came up with was business process, a process called business process modeling and notation. And that's what we base our tool Spiff Workflow is based off of. And it really is the de facto worldwide tool for modeling. There are lots of others out there that you can use, but we like BPMN, or Business Process Modeling Notation. I'll try to spell it out because a lot of these acronyms.
It's an alphabet soup. Yeah.
What are we talking about? Because it's been around, it is a standard. It is fully used for not only simple processes where flowcharts can be used, but also you can take it up into more complex processes as well. And then in 2011, they came out with a 2.0 version of it. Mm. And what that 2.0 version allowed you to do now is not only create a business process model, but with a little more work, be able to execute that model. let that be the actual application that you're running. So that's where all this that we're talking about as far as the business process lifecycle, all of a sudden people that are building these process models in the beginning can participate throughout, because that same model is getting executed. And not only that, how many times have you had a flow chart that you created for the initial concept of a particular business process, and then two years later somebody says, well, let's pull that out. Oh, it's nothing like the current process that we have. Oh, but if you're using the same model to execute, as things get changed and updated, the model gets updated too, so it's always current. So there's just a lot of great advantages to using this method.
Yeah, and talk about being really agile, like in the not the big A framework agile, but in the lowercase, being nimble, being flexible. Something like a process that you can immediately automate, execute, and your model is your automation. That actually, I think, is another way that you can build accountability into that business process model, because not only does it represent a common understanding of what you're doing, it also represents what is happening with your processes. You know what, I'm gonna share a couple of comments because I think some of these comments really underscore what we're talking about. So this is from Scott Helmers. So Scott Helmers actually is doing a 3-part series of webinars on business process models. Also, he's a Microsoft MVP in Visio. He knows a few things about models. He says, for me, process maps and models are really about communication. Now, Barb, who he's talking to in the comments, says sometimes we might agree on the model, but we might also be automating bad processes. That's interesting, right? So the business process model is not necessarily the thing. We could also not be automating things we should be automate. Have you guys experienced that? And what are maybe some of the ways that you've worked to not automate bad processes? Dan, you look like this is a top of mind for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the battle. I like both of those comments go perfectly well together, right? It's about communication. If you're not communicating clearly and people don't understand what's been placed into that diagram, and then you automate it, yeah, you get bad results. I think like there's a couple of things that are really critical. I think Scott is 100% correct. You have to focus like you can't lose sight of the so many of the tools that are out there in the market. I think they quickly lose sight. They get so wrapped up in the automation part of it, and the nitty gritty of it, that you cease to think about this as a communication tool, when that is and must be first and foremost what this is. You've got to create consensus, and people have to be able to look at this and understand it for it to have any value at all. Otherwise, it's just more software that no one understands.
Right. Yeah. Connecting those business processes to outcomes that matter is essential. So Alex, do you have other thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'll just go back to the execution part of it, why we like the tool BPM 2.0 so much. Through that complete business process lifecycle that mirrors very closely to the software development lifecycle, there are places along the way that you can use that automation, that executable aspect of it, to be able to make sure that you're not building bad processes. At the very beginning, we do a lot of prototyping with our tool, so that we can come back to stakeholders and say, in the last meeting, you talked about this. Is this represent what you were talking about? And not just a diagram, but we're able to click a button and run them through the process where the form is getting filled out, some computations are happening. Sometimes we don't have like the working API to be able to hit, but we can use a mock API and say it will return this information. So we're able to quickly do prototyping, which can be essential in making sure that you don't build bad processes.
Yeah, and I'll add another comment. This from Barb Karkenord, who's part of that conversation that's happening in chat. I told you guys our comments are great. We have people putting great comments in. So Barb says you got to make sure that your stakeholders have participated in creating the models and agree that it's right. Um, so the stakeholders absolutely have to be part of the development of this. We can certainly send an IT person off to go build a process model that you're going to automate. But if you don't have the right stakeholders in the room to help, you could be automating things that don't matter, don't give you good results. You could be creating bad results. So I think that the question is, just because you can, should you execute that process if it's not right? So um, you've defined, you brought up that term BPMN. You've defined BPMN. You actually, when we were preparing for today's broadcast, you were giving me a little more insight into BPMN. Um, it is not something that I have used. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about the levels of it, because you mentioned there's a 2.0. I don't know if you want to add a little bit more to that. And I guess the question would be, does every business analysis professional need to know BPMN? What do you think? Alex.
I'll take that. Yeah. Yeah, speaking of the levels, let's start with that. The level that we talk about, there are three different levels to creating a business process model. Level one, as Dan mentioned earlier, is usually when you're having the initial conversations with the stakeholders. And usually when you're having those initial conversations, you may have some very high level stakeholders that aren't worried about how the sausage is made, but they just want to make sure that they understand how the flow is happening, things of the sort. And that's usually the level of that process diagram. You're just talking about the main points, the main features that need to be done, the main objectives that are getting met, and things of this sort along the way. And very often, a level one BPMN diagram looks like a flow chart, because we have tools within them that flowcharts don't have. Things like one is called a sub-process. So you can have at the level one a step that is retrieve information, or get user input. Let me use that as a better example. And everybody at the table will shake their head and say, yeah, get user input. But later you go into level two, where you start drilling down what is involved with getting that user input. Often you've got to gather information, like you don't want them to have to type in the department name. You want to get that information from your HR system or some other, your ERP system or something of that sort, so that you have the official names there, and they can just have them in drop downs and things of this sort. So within a sub process, that level of detail starts coming out. And because usually there's always a stakeholder sitting in the back who's more interested in the details than in the high level. And with a sub process, you can drill down into that and show them how that's going to happen and where this information is going to be retrieved from and things of this sort. And then you also have call activities. Call activities are very analogous to call procedures. These are things that get used over and over again in other processes. So why create them each time? So you can have call activities that you use that grab the email addresses of certain people, define what groups people are in. A lot of times, instead of saying Mary is going to be the person that approves this, we need to say the role, whatever Mary's role is, because if Mary leaves, we don't want to all of a sudden track Mary to her new job to do something. We want to
or not account for that step at all because Mary left. Maybe we don't need that step anymore.
Exactly. So the level two is where the level of complexity comes in, that you're getting all that type of things, plus all the edge cases, things of this sort. And then the third level that we define is the executable level. This is where you finally come around and do the work needed to make it executable. So the kind of the recap is that even if you're not using BPMN for executable, level 1 and level 2 can be done, and all the elements are there to fully define a process, because that's what BPMN was created for by the Business Process Management Institute.
Ah, as you were talking about that, I think I also think about, sometimes all that you need to model is that level one, that high level process. Um, because that may be the only level of detail you need, or you may have found problems with it. It may not be a process you need to go any further with. So maybe some of the pushback we get sometimes from stakeholders who say we don't need a business process model is because we are too quick to get into the very detailed, um, development of business process models, when really maybe the thing we could be focused more on is just, hey, let's just put a couple of boxes on, a couple of stickies or something on the wall, just so we understand what we're talking about and we don't need to go further. Um, do you ever have conversations where you are deciding on, well, what level should we start at, Dan? And you're on mute. Hey, it happens. Welcome to the
So
21st century.
thanks. So I'm a software engineer. Like I have been one for decades now, and uh, yeah, I think consent, like getting people to understand what it is that they're trying to do, is the hardest part. And you do that in whatever way you can accomplish that task, whether that's sticky notes on the wall or whatever works. Like that's the hard work and the diplomacy and the effort. I think what happens, the problems that I've seen us face like over the years has been not those initial discussions, because that's when it's fun, right? Early in the process, when you're figuring out what you want to do, that's when everybody is engaged and everybody's excited and everyone still likes each other. It's the 2 years later where everybody's perspective has shifted in different directions, right? And like the accounting department is worried about what they're worried about, and the advertising department is worried about what they're worried about. They all are reporting up to different people. They're all thinking about different problems, and they're all angry at each other because they're all preventing themselves from doing what they need to do.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and in a software development, like everybody's ultimately just angry at the software development team. Um, and or at least that's what it feels like to me, right?
It's true.
So, but like they're frustrated because like so much of my frustration over the years has been like, but you forgot, like 6 months ago you asked for this, and now you're asking for something that is like, I know you don't see it yet, but it's in direct contradiction to what you asked for before. Is it okay to rip out the thing that? And what's really worse is I've forgotten. I don't remember what you asked for 6 months ago, but like when we go to add it to the code, it creates this bizarre thing that doesn't make sense. And I want to blame you because I don't want to take credit for that bad decision. So it just becomes this argument. So like the dream is, if you had this diagram that's not really right, like you still got the software down. It's about orchestrating that software. So if you can just take the high level concepts and get it in a diagram that's kind of controlling and talking to the different software components and assigning people tasks and asking these SaaS services to do it, or now asking these AI agents to do it, that like creates this like concrete high level understanding that everybody at least can share there. And that, yeah, I guess that's the.
Yeah. You use the word diplomacy. And I think one of the risk of creating business process models is that sometimes there can be finger pointing, particularly when you are trying to understand a process that is today failing, and you're trying to understand what's happening, where are the gaps, and because people or teams might be accountable for things, sometimes you come upon the sticky question of, well, who should be doing this? And so there can be feelings of, inadequacy, or what do you mean? That's not my job. Or sometimes people just don't know. They don't know that it's the thing they should be doing or that somebody else should be doing. So there is a level of, I'll use your term, diplomacy that has to go with this, negotiation, patience, um, helping people, facilitating. Um, what have you seen, Alex? I mean, if you're a business process architect, this is your space, and sometimes getting people to open up about processes can be difficult. Any tips to share on how you get people to have those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, this is going back to what I said in the introduction. This is where I feel like, having been a business analyst professional before, was a perfect early introduction into what you need to do to be able to do business process architecture as well. Because before I can model anything, I have to understand the process at the level that these stakeholders are trying to convey to me. And of course, many times they're talking is the same language that business analysts hear all the time. I want this, but then if you ask, well, is that really what you want, or are you thinking about this and that? Oh yeah, well that I should have mentioned it. It's the same process that you go through to pull out what actually needs to be done, but also not only what needs to be done, but why it needs to be done, and to some extent how it could be done, so that you can put all these pieces together and come up with the right business process model, and then in our case, so that it can be executed.
Yeah. So not just the what, but the why of each piece of those. It's an important step, and sometimes um, it is it is not an easy answer. It's not easy for the people responsible for that sometimes to answer the why, because it's been done that way is sometimes the answer, and they're not able to go beyond that. Well, let's take a couple of questions here. Um, this one, I think I've been checking out the chats. This one seems to have a lot of like, yeah, +1 on that. How can you differentiate business process modeling from use cases? Interesting. Dan.
It's yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad I could sit here and think about it for a minute while Alex was talking, because I was struggling with it. I think like a process, like the process model is modeling a process. So think like there's a beginning and an end to it, and a series of steps that happen along the way. So you're trying to articulate that. Whereas a use case is really trying to get at a very specific nugget of like, we need the system. The system must be able to do this particular thing. Um, so I think you would use both. One wouldn't replace the other.
Yeah. What do you
Yeah,
think, Alex?
I'm trying to remember, because I actually Googled this yesterday, and thinking about it too. But the answer that came back that kind of makes sense is that the use case is really more centered on an actor, one
Mm,
person, and what that actor is doing and how they interact with the system. Whereas the business process model is more about all the actors, all the processes, how they come together. You do need both. You need to understand what that one actor needs to do. But in a business process model, very often we represent these different actors in lanes within a pool. Um, Flowcharting calls them swim lanes for whatever reason. BPMN specification chose not to call them swim lanes, but just lanes. But each actor in that pool within a process would represent a use case potentially. And so there are correlations there, and that's again, I just will come back to this, why I think business analysts professionals are so well suited to take that next step and start thinking about business process architecture as well, because a lot of the main core pieces that are needed in business process architecture are to come from what business analysts do now.
yeah, and I want to thank Moses for that question. Also, I popped up kind of a follow-up comment from Ismail, same that was really kind of intuiting that, yep, swim lanes also could be part of that. My experience as a practitioner was that sometimes I might just be eliciting just high level use cases, trying to understand things. And then as we were trying to walk through those steps, we decided to move into something more like a business process model so that we could have more defined conversation. So that's been my experience as well. All right, I've got, let's see, we've got a couple of questions here. Here, let's take this question. This is questions from Taiwo. Where you have complex processes mapped out, then data architecture designed and mapped out to current state, how would you complete business process modeling from there? And I might expand that a little bit. What are additional kinds of models or artifacts might you incorporate around that business process model? I don't know. What do you
Oh,
think,
such
Dan?
a deep question.
Yeah,
That is going to depend heavily on where you are and what those processes look like. But I think I am assuming that like those workflows are presently mapped out in software. And there's a group of people that understands what those processes are, but like they're not globally understood. Lifting those back out of that software and making diagrams out of them could be useful in certain circumstances, right? Not in every circumstance. But I think like these automation tools that do have a visual component to them, like Spiff workflow or like any of these BPMN tools that allow you to like not have that process described just in code, but to have it somewhere where everybody can look at it and understand it and argue about it, has real value. And I don't think you have to do that all at once. I think you can do that one at a time and slowly pull this up and make it more visible and open up that communication at that level.
yeah. It's about building on as needed. Yeah. I agree. Alex, you have thoughts on
I
that question?
think Dan pretty much hit that.
Mhm.
It really is. Both of those need to be done. There are kind of the extensions to the business process modeling and notation. One of them is how data does flow, how you store the data, how messaging flows, and so there are. But if you're had a way of doing your data architecture design, the two together ultimately end up being what you execute.
Yeah, this is where there's a bit of an art to the work that we do as business analysis professionals. Because, sometimes when you are modeling a process, you may want to go in other places, other artifacts, other techniques that can really take more time, go deeper into things that maybe we don't yet need to go into. I think here there's a real argument for doing what's needed at the time that it's needed, because that can also help us, especially if we have stakeholders where we have stepped into something that they're not ready to have a conversation about. So kind of keeping that in mind of how deep we need to go. Danilo has our next question. As an IT business analyst, is it necessary to map only activities that are done within a software or entire business process and scope? And then he's asking about some mapping tools. So maybe answering that question, is it necessary to only map activities that are done in a software? So if you're mapping a process, do I only care about the ones that the software is going to automate, or do I need to do the ones that maybe Mary does manually?
Very much so. It's best to do them all. In
Mm,
fact, the BPMN specification provides a task type called the manual task. And because very often, like the manual task could be something as simple, go retrieve the report from the printer. But it also could be pack whatever you're getting ready to ship or whatever it is that you do. And back to that optimization aspect that we were talking about earlier, sometimes these can be the longer steps that need, maybe there's can get proof that a better way of packing or getting a printer closer to Mary would be better. So yes, there are elements within BPML to cover every aspect of what happens in a business process.
yeah. I don't know. I'm thinking that sometimes we want to, well, we want to think about not only capturing the things that the tool that we're going to automate, and also not being specific to indicate things that will be automated in a specific tool. That I probably can create problems in business process models. If I think that the tool we're going to use is X and I define that in the business process, I could potentially be eliminating options for how I automate that thing. So let's see.
One
Maybe, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
that just like hit on a few different, yeah, on a few different questions that were in there. So I wanted to mention, like, one of the nice things about BPMN is that you can nest it. So if you don't like at that high level, you can keep that high level diagram like great for boardroom discussions, and then you can nest the more technical stuff so you can get it out of that diagram and nest it in a more technical layer underneath, but still in BPMN. Um, and you can also like break down and reuse BPMN processes. So you can say, look, here's the step where we send, our emails out to everyone. And that's all that says. It does a call activity is what it's called, but it calls it a
Mhm.
whole another process. That whole other process, you can abstract that away. So when it's time to stop using HubSpot and slide in MailChimp, you can do that. And it becomes like it's business architecture, right? And process architecture. And those are like nuanced things that take practice to do, but it's very doable.
Oh, and that to me, by the way, feels like a whole other podcast topic, which is reusability. So building business processes in a way that you can also maximize the use out of, because sending an email in a process is sending an email. Like you don't need to go any deeper in that. But depending on, if that process is marketing, there could be a different tool for that, or, but it is still the same process. And that's in many ways a way that you can optimize your business process models is by finding ways to reuse parts of them. All right. Well, I think we've had some pretty good questions today. And I want to thank you both for joining us. And maybe I'll give you guys a second to wrap up. Anything that you want our viewers to take away with them about business process models, Dan?
Um, Gosh, well, one, these questions were excellent. So thank you so much. Like, yeah, it's neat to see such a global audience, and it's really fun to I really appreciate all the interest. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Susan. And this was a ton of fun. I do hope, yeah, one of the things that we're doing is we have an open source project called Spiff Workflow. I would love, if you have any interest in it, please go check it out. And yeah, thank you so much for this time.
Yeah.
And for me, Susan, you warned us about how prolific and well uh, framed all the questions would be. And I've just been amazed as they've been scrolling by. And so please, anybody that had a question that didn't get answered, don't hesitate to send us an email, or we have a Discord channel, spiffworkflow.org. Spiff Workflow Discord channel. Get in touch with us, ask the question, and we'll be glad to answer the question for you.
Yeah, perfect. And actually, I'll get your LinkedIn info, and then if people want to connect with you, and actually they may be able to connect with you just through like LinkedIn magic, as we've been
Even
talking
better.
today. Yeah. So fantastic. Well, I want to thank you both for joining me. So Dan, Alex, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Maybe we need to talk some more about business processes. I know we will be in touch soon. All right.
Sounds
So
wonderful.
yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dan. All right. So we are wrapping up for today. It's been a great conversations. Clearly, I can tell from the comments that business process models matter to you. So we appreciate everyone's questions. And hey, we're going to be back in 2 weeks from today, and we're going to be talking about nurturing ideas in the business analysis community. Sure, it's cool hanging out with business analysis professionals. We're fun people. but there's some really important things that happen when business analysis professionals get together. And I've got somebody who's been talking a lot about that, and he's going to join me and be my guest next time. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We're going to see you 2 weeks from today, same time. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.